Prime Minister Narendra Modi departs for a high-profile European tour that blends diplomacy, technology, trade and global leadership. From bilateral talks with French President Emmanuel Macron and a historic first-ever visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Slovakia to participation in the G7 summit and Europe's biggest startup event, the visit is aimed at strengthening India's strategic footprint across Europe. India has been invited as a partner country by France, which holds the 2026 G7 presidency. This will be India's 13th participation at the G7 summit. For that, Prime Minister Narendra Modi now heads to Europe. A visit that could further cement India's strategic, economic and technological partnerships with key European players. As he mentions in a post on social media that the focus of the visit will be on boosting the economic and cultural linkages. The tour will begin in the French city of Nice, where PM Modi will hold bilateral talks with French President Emmanuel Macron. Defense cooperation, civil nuclear energy, critical technologies, innovation and regional security are expected to dominate the discussions. A key highlight in Nice will be the launch of Bharat Innovates, a flagship event bringing together startups, innovators and venture capital leaders from India, France and beyond. From France, Prime Minister Modi will travel to Slovakia for a landmark visit. This will be the first ever visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Slovakia since the country gained independence in 1993. Talks with Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico and President Peter Pellegrini are expected on the lines of trade, investment, renewable energy, mobility, railways and defense manufacturing. The next stop is WION in France, where PM Modi will participate in the G7 summit as an invited leader. This will be India's 13th participation in the G7 and PM Modi's 7th appearance at the summit. Leaders will discuss global growth, international partnerships, critical mineral supply chains, and the responsible rollout of artificial intelligence. PM Modi could also meet US President Donald Trump on the sidelines of the G7 summit. If the talks materialize, it would mark the first face-to-face meeting between the two leaders in more than a year. Now, for more on this, our Assistant Editor of Foreign Affairs, Siddhant Sibbal, is joining us live on the broadcast from WION in France. Siddhant, you are at WION, which will be at the heart of international news from June 15th to 17th as world leaders gather for the G7 summit. What is the mood on the ground and what are the key issues dominating conversations ahead of the leaders' arrival?
Well, to reach to the place of G7 is not easy. Logistically, it's always a nightmare, and that is the case this time around as well. And now to come to this very place, you need to go to Switzerland and cross the border from Zurich and finally arrive. It almost took 24 hours to reach here at the very place. Of course, we are near that place. We are at a resort right now, which is the place where most of the media is staying, because that entire area where the leaders are going to meet has been closed, and that is primarily because of the high security. But logistics aside, this year's summit is taking place in the backdrop of a big crisis, especially the West Asia crisis, and that, of course, is dominating the agenda. What will be the big focus? We'll get to know in the next few days. But the big focus will also be on a special meeting on West Asia, where not only India and US will be present along with the other G7 countries, but also countries invited from West Asia, including Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. And it looks like that the French side is keen to push for a proposal on Hormuz movement through Hormuz. Also, the big focus for India, of course, will be to represent the voice of the global South. Now, India has been regularly invited at the G7 summit since 2019, when the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was first invited to attend the G7 summit, and since then, consecutively, he has been invited. And this year, a lot of things on the table, including an expected bilateral meeting with the US President Donald Trump. And if it happens, that will be the first meeting between the two leaders since February of last year. Now, trade tensions have been dominating the relationship, but also earlier last week we saw how killing of three Indian sailors has been something that shocked and, of course, angered India. India, of course, summoned the US diplomat in Delhi, the CDA twice, and the Indian External Affairs Minister has spoken to the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. But that aside, coming back to the G7, we know that this year's G7 will also focus on issues like AI, issues like climate change, and alternate supply chain routes.
Thank you for all those updates, Siddhant.